In this next section, we're going to learn about the color class and the font class, starting with the color class. In JavaFX, we have a paint class, which is an abstract class for painting a node. The color class is a concrete class which extends the abstract class paint. The color class is then used to encapsulate colors, which can be used to provide color for different nodes within JavaFX. The color class uses the RGBA model. RGB stands for red, green, blue, and A represents the opacity, or in other words transparency, of the color. The values for red, green, and blue range from 0 to 1, which would be the darkest shade to the lightest shade respectively. The opacity, on the other hand, specifies the transparency. It also ranges from 0 to 1, where 0 means completely transparent. In other words, you can see through it like it wasn't even there, whereas 1 would represent completely opaque, where it's completely non-transparent, and that would be sort of just a normal solid color. And you have everything in between as you go from 0 to 1. So 0.5 would indicate 50% transparency. The color's there, you can see it, but at the same time you can sort of see through it as well. In this next slide, we have an example of specifying a particular color. So we've defined an object little c of class color, and we set it equal to new color. The red content is 0.25 or 25% red, in other words, because since this number goes from 0 to 1, you can think of it as a percentage, at least a percentage specified as a decimal fraction. The next parameter, 14%, would be the green content, and finally 33.3% roughly would be the blue content specified here. The opacity is 0.51, so it's roughly 50% transparent. So in other words, you can see through it but not completely through it. The color class is immutable. That's one point about it. And you can use any of the standard colors such as black, notice it's all in capitals, blue, and cyan. These predefined colors are constants in the color class, and you can use them simply by referring to the class name dot the constant name. So for example, color dot red, and that's what we've done here, and we've done that a number of times in some of the past demos so far for setting stroke and setting fill. In this case, if we wanted the color to be the fill color for a circle to be red, we could say circle dot set fill, and then in brackets color dot red. And this is not a new example, you've seen this before. Using this method will only allow us to use just the predefined colors. If we want an arbitrary color, we would have to fall back on the method at the top of the slide here, where you specify particular values for red, green, blue, and transparency or opacity. This UML diagram is provided here mostly just for your reference, except there are two particular things I'd like to draw to your attention here. And one is the brighter method, and the other is the darker method. These two methods will allow you to take an existing color and increase the brightness or decrease the brightness respectively, and that can be a handy thing to be able to do. The font class can be used to specify from a number of different fonts whenever you wish to show text somewhere in one of your graphics. This class is used to create a font in which you can describe the font name, the font weight, and the font size. We have some examples here at the bottom of the slide. So for example, we can define font1 to be an object of class font, and we can say that it's a new font, and we can specify the font typeface sans serif and 16 point, and that's what's being done in that first example. In the second example, we're doing something similar for font 2. This is Times New Roman with a font weight of bold and a font posture of italic and 12 point for the size. Again, this UML diagram is provided mostly for your reference, although there are again two particular methods that I'd like to draw to your attention which are kind of interesting and useful, and that's right at the bottom, the get families and the get font names. It's very difficult to remember some of these things, and these two functions will actually return a list of all the font family names and all of the full font names, including the family and the weight, so that you can see what's available to pick from when you're writing a program. We're not actually going to go out to the Eclipse IDE to demonstrate this code, but we'll just talk it through. The main purpose of this slide, of course, is to simply illustrate fonts and how you would use them. But it also illustrates the use of the stack pane in an interesting way as well. So right at the top of the code, you can see where we're defining a pane. It's a new stack pane. We're going to wind up adding two children to this stack pane, and they will stack one on top of the other, and you will see them presented that way. In the next section of code, we define a circle called circle. We set its radius to 50. We set the color of its stroke or outline to black. And then we design our own color for the middle. It's actually a gray because equal amounts of red, green, and blue are something between white and black, depending on what those values are. In this case, we have 50% red, 50% green, 50% blue. So it's equal amounts of each primary, and because it's half, it's halfway between pure white and pure black. In other words, it's gray. So we're looking at exactly 50% gray. And for the opacity value, we have 0.1, which means it's not completely transparent, but it's a little bit, well, it's actually the other way around, I suppose. It's got a very low value, which means it's very, very transparent in this case. Remember, 0 would be completely transparent, and 1.0 would be completely opaque. And we're sitting at 10%, which is almost completely transparent. So even though the gray that we've set for this circle would actually look quite a bit darker if it was opaque, because it's so transparent, it actually looks very, very light gray in this case. We're going to be adding two children to our stack pane, and the first is a circle, which we do in the bottom line of this section of code. Moving on to the third section of code, that is the third block from the top here where the red section is, we're now going to create a label. You've seen that happen before, so we say label equals new label JavaFX. And here's where we exercised what we just finished learning about fonts. So we're going to set the font for our label equal to font dot little font times Roman times new Roman, font weight bold, font posture italic, and 20 point for the size. We then add this as the second child to our stack pane. So our stack pane now contains a circle with a JavaFX string on top of it. In the final block of code at the bottom of the slide, then we add the pane to the scene, and then we prepare the title for the stage, and then we add the scene to the stage, and then finally we show the stage. And in the end, what you see is what's up there in the top right hand corner. We see the circle with JavaFX inside of it as a result of stacking those two things within a stack plane. Again, note that the gray is not terribly dark, and it's not because of the 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, which would normally make a fairly dark gray color. But because of the transparency being set to 0.1, it's very transparent. In other words, it's not very opaque. So we're seeing through it that dark gray, and it doesn't look nearly as dark as it otherwise would.